Weddings are fantastic. They're this rare opportunity to step out of the day-to-day and say to someone, hey, I kind of like you. We've been videographers in the wedding industry here on Vancouver Island for over 10 years now. And one of the most common things we hear from couples and other vendors who want to plan a sustainable event is, I'd love to, but I just don't know how.
So in this series, we're going to explore how to actually have a sustainable event. And with help from vendors all over Vancouver Island and across the wedding industry, we'll talk about how to create and celebrate a sustainable wedding from the planning stages to the footprint that's left behind. From the big picture to the small details, we'll provide tips and tricks for how to get you sustainably wed. If you've watched our first 2 episodes, you'll know that the first 2 steps we recommend taking towards a sustainable wedding are, first, start with a sustainable mindset. And second, work with people who share that mindset. Those 2 steps will really help set you up for success in the rest of your planning. But they aren't really that tangible, right? So in our next episodes, we're going to dive right into the practical decisions you can make that will help you keep your wedding footprint to a minimum. And we're going to kick that off in this episode by talking about sourcing locally and seasonally. Sourcing local materials and ingredients can make such a huge difference in so many ways. And to learn more about what sourcing local can look like, I met up with Chef Dan from Farmsgate Catering, who might just be the king of finding great local ingredients.
So we're a catering company that operates in the Cowichan Valley, but really anywhere between Victoria and Comox, even out in Tofino and Ucluelet now, Salt Spring as well. We're a catering company on Vancouver Island, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
We do events that range from farmers markets just like this, to long table dinners, to weddings for a couple hundred people too. That's how we spend our time, I would say.
Yeah.
But who we are, I think, comes down more to how we operate our business. And that's just more of being really thoughtful and connecting with our community through sourcing.
Something that's really cool about Farmsgate is that Dan and his team don't just source from BC farms or from Vancouver Island farms, they go hyper local. So if they have an event in Comox, they're going to do their best to source from farms in Comox. If they have an event in Saanich, they're going to source from Saanich growers and producers. This approach helps make sure that they're getting the best quality ingredients for every event.
Hyperlocal is a pretty accurate term, especially because when we do events, like when we're doing events in Victoria or in Comox, we have farms that we access, maybe not, certainly not the entire menu, right, but for things like salad greens and things that we can prep on site that don't require a lot of prep before the event, then we get that from wherever the event's being held. And if we could do more, we would. That's something that it's fun for us. We love doing that.
Oh, that's so
and we're certainly not unique when it comes to chefs around the world who are doing that kind of thing. And that's something that I think I've started doing that because chefs that I look up to, you hear about them doing the same thing. So right. And it just kind of makes sense, and that's kind of what I always say when people ask about why we source locally. Is well, it just kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
You have access to these amazing products. Why wouldn't you use them?
Sourcing locally and seasonally is kind of a way of life for Dan and his team, and for many other caterers on Vancouver Island, which is just so awesome. I asked Dan why a wedding couple should consider sourcing locally for their event.
For me, it's just about the circular economy, right? It's about keeping money in your community. Even if you are having a destination wedding on Vancouver Island, you'd want to support the community that you're having that event in, because it's easy that way. And it just makes sense to work with the caterers who are going to be sourcing from other suppliers in the same region, to work with bartenders who are using local distilled products, alcohol. It just makes sense.
Yeah. What about the quality of the ingredient? Are you able to find the right quality of ingredient to serve at a wedding on Vancouver Island?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, no question.
There are some amazing farms out here that I've cooked in a lot of different places in my career, and There's stuff here that I never thought I would find on Vancouver Island, and there's the level of quality that's just as good as anywhere else, if not. The Cowichan Valley is, and Saanich, and Comox Valley, you can go on and on of all these little beautiful micro growing areas that are producing just outstanding products.
Dan has connections with providers everywhere, all over the island, and that's obviously something that not every wedding couple is going to have, because why would you? So I asked him for his advice for a couple who wants to source local ingredients and materials for their wedding.
I really think it's just about the finding the right, if you find one person in that community that you're going to have your event who has the right mindset, they're going to know where you can get everything, or at least know who to ask. So I think it's just putting feelers out there, finding that one venue or that one caterer, that one florist who does things right, and they'll help guide you.
So if you watched our episode on finding your vendors, that message is going to sound pretty familiar. But I've got to say that I saw it in action firsthand with Dan as we walked around the market. When he says he knows these vendors, he really knows them. Walking around the market with him is like walking around with a celebrity. Everyone's waving at him, and vendors are coming up and giving him new things to try. And he'll go up and check in with somebody who will be just like, swing by tomorrow, I'll leave the back door open, you can just grab the produce from the kitchen. It's really awesome.
After we chatted with Dan, I really wanted to get a perspective on what the impact of not shopping locally could be. So to chat more about that, I went over to see Jill Doucette, the Executive Director of the Synergy Foundation. Throughout this series, we talk a lot about carbon footprints, but we haven't actually yet spoken about what a carbon footprint is. And so I'm hoping you can start us off with explaining that. What is a carbon footprint?
A carbon footprint is really all of the greenhouse gas emissions that are a result of the activities of a given event, a given business, or a given lifestyle. Those can arise from direct emissions from, say, owning and operating a vehicle, or indirect emissions, such as producing waste that then goes to a landfill and produces methane gas. When it comes to produce and where you're sourcing from, the transportation emissions can be incredible, especially if you have produce that goes bad quickly, in which case it needs to travel by air to get to its destination. Then the carbon footprint skyrockets, no pun intended. So, the distance is a huge factor, but also what kind of farm are you supporting? Because agriculture can be either a carbon source or a carbon sink, meaning that with sustainable and regenerative agriculture, you can actually sequester carbon from the atmosphere, and it's stored in the soil, and that soil is built over time. So practices like no-till and other sustainable permaculture type of systems, which are quickly being adopted in agriculture, can actually mean that your carbon footprint of buying that produce has sequestered carbon. So where, choosing to support sustainable farmers and communicating to your caterer that these are the kind of farms that you want to support as local as possible, and ideally sustainable or regenerative farms where available. And choosing produce, of course, that's seasonal, because if it's not seasonal, it has to come from far away, and it may very well travel by air to get to your plate.
We've talked a lot about food so far and how important it is to source locally where you can. And there are lots of benefits to sourcing locally beyond reducing your footprint. One of the big benefits, I think, is that you get to show off the unique products of the place where you're getting married. And you give your guests an experience that they won't be able to get anywhere else. And one of the best ways to do this, in my opinion, is with a cocktail. Wow. Okay, that's a step up.
Yeah, I mean, we make some literally world-renowned spirits in addition to beer and wine in BC. But if we're looking, if we're really zeroing in on Vancouver Island, there's some just fantastic stuff being made using things that are grown here, things that are foraged here. It's a fertile land, so there's a lot of opportunities.
Andrew is the co-owner of Twist of Fate Craft Cocktails, and he's just incredible at what he does. You might recognize him from the market with Dan. Andrew was there selling his cordial mixes, which allow you to make awesome cocktails easily at home. It's very dangerous. He's an incredible bartender, but he's also just a wealth of knowledge and expertise.
Places like Divine Distillery in Saanich, they have an incredible product called Ancient Grains, using all Vancouver Island grains, really unique stuff that isn't found in most whiskeys, that is won numerous gold medals. It's just fantastic stuff. They also make the product that we have right here called Honey Shine, distilled from honey, which is in the mojito here. But yeah, it's just a plentiful array. I brought some just kind of as an example of the amazing spirits made in BC and on the island in particular, just because there's lots out there, and you know, why buy something that is made in France when you can have a similar yet more unique and craft product that's made you know, within your own town or community.
Definitely. Well, I mean, when you think about, you know, a cocktail like this, you won't get this anywhere else, right? Because the ingredients are so unique to right here.
For sure. There's a story behind every cocktail, and for our wedding clients in particular, we often have one to represent each of the wedding couple. So there's their own interests behind them, but then also products that represent where they're from.
Right.
And so when their family members from the United States or from Europe or South America are here, they get to showcase cocktails that represent where they live. And it's pretty fun to be able to create a menu that represents that.
There are some challenges to sourcing everything locally for some cocktails or products. Although we can find great stuff here on the island, there are limits. And Andrew explained that when that happens, he's able to do the research to find good quality, sustainable products from around the world.
Absolutely, yeah. In the Orange Ginger Mojito, we've got a Nicaraguan rum. In order to be a rum, it has to be distilled from sugarcane. So we've got things like local representatives of rum they're distilled from honey, but if you need and want true rum, you have to go to the Caribbean. But there are sustainable producers like Flor de Caña who make fantastic rums that are ethically sourced and all fair trade certified. So yeah, it's finding that balance between just showcasing what we do here and then also being able to represent great things that are made all over the planet, because we like to think we're doing the best we can and we're doing the right thing, and we're really proud of what we do. So sustainability is super important to us, just because we love where we live so much and we want to protect it. But also it just makes sense. I mean, we want to deliver amazing cocktails in fine glassware to clients, because it's not the same as
because look how fancy.
yeah. If that was in a red Solo cup, it wouldn't really have the same appeal.
No, I feel very elegant.
Yeah, as you should.
Andrew had some great recommendations for couples looking to be more sustainable, including sourcing wine and beer locally, and of course, working with a bartender who uses local craft spirits. But one of the things he also mentioned, which honestly I had never thought about before, is to lean into the seasonality of spirits.
We also curate our cocktail menu based on seasons. So we have things that are kind of available in the fall and in the winter. We make our own apple cider using apples from our own apple trees in our backyard. That is only kind of a fall cocktail item. Yeah, there is some seasonality to it, but it's almost like a positive, because you just like naturally in the fall you're harvesting apples and you can showcase those elements in your cocktails.
Amazing.
So yeah, it's you just kind of you roll with it and make it work.
Speaking of seasonal and local, one of the areas of a wedding where seasonality is so important is your florals. There are tons of great flower farmers working on Vancouver Island who are working really hard to ensure that we have beautiful flowers grown here for as long as the growing season will allow it each year, which tends to line up pretty well with when the majority of weddings happen on the island. But not all florists use local flowers 100% of the time. So we visited Thanushi at Wild Bee Florals to learn more about what the impact can look like when flowers are imported from around the world.
So, for example, here at the farm, we don't use any pesticides. So it's all, just working with the soil to make sure the plants are healthy. We cut it, we put it into a bucket, it goes into the floral cooler, and when it's time to plant for the event, the bucket comes out. we arrange, and then the rest of the footprint is just like if it's a delivery, like we go into the car and drive for 10 minutes and it's like, here's your flowers, you know, or they come and pick it up. Whereas let's say like you're getting roses that's grown in Central or South America. It's grown to be extremely productive. Like people have to sometimes wear hazmat suits to like go in to like fertilize it. So it's like a lot of fertilization, a lot of pesticides, and also that affects like the farmer health as well that we don't necessarily get to see. And once it is harvested, it comes to a transportation facility, so usually airplanes. If the airport authorities detect like there's a fungus here, or you know there's something wrong with the plants, like all of those plants get destroyed. So in order to make sure that it doesn't come to that, they spray a lot of fungicides so that things can, you know, come over to here and like look really good. And then once it's here, it goes to like another facility, people bid on it, more transportation to where the florists are, and then like where the flowers are going. So there's a lot of air miles and just a lot of gas and like diesel being spent on a perfect rose sometimes, you know?
So if you're getting flowers from a local grower like Thanushi, you can feel good about the fact that your flowers have not traveled far to get to your event. And not only is she growing so many incredible flowers right on her farm, she's also harvesting sustainably from the natural landscape around her. So you can also feel good about the fact that places like Wild Bee Florals are using practices that are sustainable. But in this case, it's more than that. They're actually actively promoting healthy soil and biodiversity. At Wild Bee, Thanushi focuses on regenerative agriculture.
Well, regenerative agriculture is actually like an umbrella term for a lot of different farming practices that focus on soil health. It focuses on the water cycle. It focuses on enhancing biodiversity while knowing that plants sequester carbon from the atmosphere. So it's building resiliency to climate change by making sure that there is no soil exposed unless you're about to plant. So if you look at our farm, you can see that the pathways are living pathways. And so when we mow it, the mulch gets put back into either a compost pile or it gets put right into our perennial patches to suppress weeds. So yeah, essentially it's focusing on soil health because that's the building block for the entire farm operation.
One of the key things about shopping locally on Vancouver Island is that you also kind of have to shop seasonally because certain types of food and flowers just don't grow here year-round. And if you had a certain type of flower in mind for your wedding, that might be kind of hard to adjust to. So I asked Thanushi about that and what couples can do to shop locally and seasonally and still get something really awesome.
There are so many beautiful flowers that are growing at all times of the year. So just by being open to it, you're also ensuring that you're gonna have a beautiful wedding too. Like, you know, things that folks are sometimes hyper-fixated on, like peonies and roses and ranunculus sometimes, like there are dahlias and like zinnias and you know, tweedia. Like there are all these like magical flowers that you wouldn't even consider, but now are part of your event. Right. And that's beautiful. Yeah.
I think it brings a really cool story too. If you're in a place that's really special to you for your wedding, and then you're adding on these local stories and these local makers, and you give perhaps the chef a moment to talk about where that food comes from. That psychologically makes the food even more delicious and special to be able to hear that story. And I think that just adds a really special element to a wedding. And in terms of pre-wedding prep, going around and tasting different local beverages and food and visiting farms, it's probably one of the most fun parts of planning a wedding.
Absolutely. Any day that you get to go and taste foods and go to beautiful places, that's a pretty good day.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we did next. When we met up with Chef Dan from Farmsgate, he offered to make us a dish using local ingredients to show us what's possible. And I mean, when Chef Dan offers to make you a dish, you accept that offer. So we met up with Dan at Keating Farm, which is a working farm and wedding venue in the Cowichan Valley, to watch him work. And we took Jill's advice and asked Dan to tell us about the menu. Just listen to how many of the ingredients he was able to use right from Keating Farm itself.
Brunch is something that I love. I think I'm one of the few chefs that actually will gladly cook brunch fare. But yeah, so we had a couple different like bennies, you could say. So I made sourdough English muffins, radish top pesto on there. That's one of our products that we use to kind of eliminate waste in our kitchen. We have eggs from these guys. There was some flowering brassicas, so brassicas that we had some heat recently, and it had one of the farms I work with had all their stuff bolt. So she contacted me and said, hey, do you have any use for any of these? And that was just this morning, literally. So it was a nice surprise to add to the meal. This is a quiche here with a hazelnut crust. There's hazelnuts on top from Keating Farm. The greens are from a local farm, and then they're dressed with honey from these guys. The hive's just literally behind the house. Yeah, it's really just good ingredients, makes good food.
Yeah, well, I can vouch for that now. I'm sitting down around the table here with Chef Dan and his brother Michael, who run Farmsgate Catering, along with Rebecca and George, who own Keating Farm, which is the incredible venue for this meal, as well as a working farm. I was so happy to sit down with them, not just to eat these incredible eggs benny and the quiche, but also to ask them about farming and the local food community.
I think the variety is like surprising to people. Just that people don't know the variety that's on the island. And I also think the passion of the producers is very strong on Vancouver Island. So I think that maybe, and it's not unique per se to Vancouver Island, but all the producers are very, very passionate. So that's something a little unique.
Yeah, the number of artisanal producers that we've come across is pretty staggering, and the quality, it's world-class quality, absolutely. And that was a big part of what drew us to the Valley, was that this was a perfect place to be part of that community. And I think there's an incredible culture around collaboration as well, which is really, really fun, where there's these artisans that are really excellent at their craft, but they love working with other artisans that are really excellent at their craft. And there's this beautiful kind of partnership that can get created, and it can be super playful, and you can create things that you would have never thought that you were going to be creating, which has been a lot of fun too.
Well, and what I love about all that, and this being such a unique, not only place, but community, is like, if you're bringing guests here for a wedding, you're bringing them from out of town or out of the country, why not show this off? Like, this is so cool. It's so unique. You're not going to have eggs benny like that anywhere else. Why not show that off to your guests?
Yeah, and you're also showing off like everything about the community. You know, like we have a plate, and even like just beyond what these guys are producing, there's still, I'm using flour that's milled in Cowichan Bay to make both of these products. You know, people, I often say that people don't actually know how much is packed into everything that they're eating when they're eating with us. You have a wedding here, it's not just us and you guys and the bartender or whoever, it's also every producer that everyone's supporting to make that event happen.
Keating Farm isn't just a local farm and an awesome venue with great ingredients. They also put sustainability at the core of what they do. And for me, it's another reason to work with local vendors, because you can actually visit and see what they're doing and see the impact that they're having. Rebecca and George take a regenerative approach to farming, just like Thanushi does at Wild Beef Laurels. And I asked Rebecca how that approach can help actually sequester carbon.
I think agriculture has been villainized in a lot of ways with respect to climate change, and regenerative agriculture sequesters carbon. It reverses climate change. It's actually fighting that battle as well. And so it's a way of farming that is almost exactly opposite of kind of the way that industrialized farming has been.
Well, the way that you're farming, rotational grazing, it actually retains more CO2 in the soil than if you were just to plant trees out there.
Right.
So if more people were doing this, if more farmers were doing this, it would create a little bit of a better climate for us.
I've always said that if people were to take into consideration all of the impacts of what they were doing and making those types of business decisions, that they would always be driven to the right answer and the most environmentally friendly and sustainable answer. But that there's always, if you're looking at just the pure economics and hard costs, and you're excluding the environmental impacts and the social impacts and all of those other impacts, and you don't account for those in your analysis, you can end up with really bad decisions that drive you in a way that have all these other consequences that you haven't accounted for. But I think some of those decisions are getting even simpler right now, because of the state of the world. But I would really hope that we could get to a place where we're making more informed, well-rounded decisions overall, because it will continue to drive us towards making better decisions.
Well, and on the flip side, if somebody chooses to have an event here and has catering from Farmsgate, not only are they're having a great event, they're having great food, but then that ripple effect goes out to the community. They're supporting the community here. But then you're sequestering carbon here. So they're actually, that event is having a positive impact.
Yep.
That's super cool. You don't often think about an event having a positive footprint. We often think about them as they just have to have a negative one. We're going to have to accept that.
And how to mitigate that the best we can.
But you can actually make choices that have that ripple effect here. And then also eat really good food and be in a gorgeous place.
It's also a good decision.
It's always a good decision. Always a good decision.
There's more to come about all of this. And in our next episodes, we're going to talk about reusing, recycling, and reducing to help bring down the footprint of your event. And eventually, we'll talk about that big idea that came up over dinner. The idea that you don't have to have a negative footprint with your wedding. You can actually have a positive impact on the environment. And when you think about it, that's a pretty awesome way to start a relationship. So if you want to learn more about that and so much more, stick around for the next episodes.